Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive? Let's talk alienation.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
We're not talking about the I don't know anyone at this party kind of alienation.
Right.
More like the kind that really gets under your skin, messes with your mental health.
Yeah, the kind that makes you question everything.
Exactly. And what if I told you that this feeling is like built into the system we live in?
Oh, I like where this is going.
Well, strap in because we're going deep with this article by Jaime Hoerricks.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them.
They're a PhD. The article's called Alienation and Mental Health, How Capitalism Manufactures Suffering and Suppresses Its Cure.
Catchy title.
Right. It really gets you thinking. And what's really interesting is that Hoerricks brings their own experience into the mix, being autistic and trans.
So it's not just theory, it's personal.
Exactly. They talk about growing up feeling so different, so targeted, but not even having the words to describe it.
I think a lot of people can relate to that feeling of being an outsider.
Absolutely. And it's not just a teenage phase. There's something much deeper going on.
And it can be so isolating, especially when you turn to the systems that are supposed to help and they don't get it.
That's what really struck me about Hoerricks' experience with traditional therapy and psychiatry.
Like they weren't seen as a whole person.
Yeah, it felt like they were being treated as a problem to be fixed, not a person in pain trying to navigate a world that just doesn't fit.
That's where we miss the mark so often with mental health. We focus on individual solutions without addressing the societal forces at play.
Totally. And Hoerricks goes on to talk about medication and how it affected their thinking, especially as someone who processes information in this really holistic way.
Medication can be a double-edged sword for sure.
Right. They felt like it dulled their senses, disconnected them from the world.
It's a good reminder that there's no one-size-fits-all solution for mental health.
For Hoerricks, true healing began with self-understanding and transition.
Finding that alignment between their inner and outer worlds.
Exactly. And it wasn't about conforming to some external pressure. It was about being authentically themselves.
That's so powerful.
Okay, so now to understand alienation, we need to talk about Karl Marx.
Here we go.
Everyone knows his name, but his ideas are so much more relevant than most people realize.
Marx was really ahead of his time in a lot of ways.
Right, he identified this feeling of being a cog in the machine, working just to survive. He called it alienation from labor.
And how that disconnect from our work keeps us from really thriving.
Yeah, think about how many people are stuck in jobs they hate. Is it any wonder they're struggling with anxiety or depression?
Marx would say it's all connected.
Totally. And this alienation from labor leads to all these other problems, feeling disconnected from ourselves, from other people, even from our own creative potential.
Like we're all just drifting through life.
Yeah, just trying to keep up on this treadmill of existence.
And when we do reach out for help, the system often offers these band-aid solutions, therapy, medication, self-care, which can be helpful, but they don't get to the root cause.
So are you saying that capitalism actually benefits from keeping us unwell?
It's not about some evil mastermind. It's more like the system is designed to thrive on insecurity and instability.
Because if everyone felt secure and content, they'd be less likely to accept the status quo.
Exactly. They wouldn't put up with exploitation or inequality. They'd demand more.
That's kind of brilliant in a messed up way.
Well, effective at least, and this is where Frantz Fanon's work comes in.
Oh yeah, Fanon the psychiatrist and revolutionary.
He understood how alienation was used as a tool of oppression, especially in the context of colonialism.
Hoerricks mentions his book Black Skin, White Masks, where he talks about how colonized people are forced to internalize the values of the oppressor.
Having to deny your own identity just to survive.
And that takes a huge psychological toll, this constant code switching, this feeling of never truly belonging.
It's exhausting.
Speaking of exhausting, let's talk about Mao Zedong.
Mao Zedong. What does he have to do with mental health?
It might seem strange, but hear me out. Hoerricks uses Mao's concepts of contradiction to explain how the tension between our individual needs and the demands of society can create this immense suffering.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
So, for example, society tells you to be yourself, but then punishes you for being different.
So that contradiction plays out in all these different ways.
Exactly. It could be about gender identity, neurodiversity, sexuality, anything that makes you feel at odds with the world.
And if those contradictions aren't addressed, they can manifest in all sorts of ways: anxiety, depression, self-destructive behaviors.
Like your mind and body are screaming that something is wrong.
And it's not enough to just focus on coping mechanisms. We need to address those underlying contradictions.
So therapy can only go so far. We need a more systemic approach.
Exactly. Individual therapy won't dismantle the systems that are creating these contradictions in the first place.
So we need collective action, social movements, a real shift in power dynamics.
To create a world where people can actually thrive, not just survive.
Okay, so we've talked about Marx and Fanon, but Hoerricks also brings up Amilcar Cabral, a leader in the anti-colonial movement who had some interesting ideas about culture.
Oh, listen.
Cabral argued that severing people from their own history, their traditions, their identity, what he called cultural alienation, is a form of violence.
And we see this happening all the time in a capitalist society.
Right, this pressure to assimilate, to give up our own cultures and traditions in favor of this globalized monoculture.
Which values individualism and consumerism above all else.
And in the process, we lose that sense of belonging, that connection to something bigger than ourselves.
And that loss can have a profound impact on our well-being. That's why so many people feel lost and disconnected in this world that often feels so shallow and transactional.
So if alienation is so deeply embedded in our society, how do we even begin to fight back?
Well, it's not easy, but it starts with awareness, recognizing these systems and how they operate, how they impact our lives and our minds. That's the first step toward reclaiming our power. And that brings us to a really crucial point that Hoerricks makes about the current moment, but we are going to dive right into that after a quick word from our sponsors.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle this assault on the mind.
Yeah, it's a pretty intense concept.
Hoerricks argues that capitalism actually thrives on crisis and instability. It's not about creating well-being. It actually profits from keeping people on edge, struggling, in a constant state of anxiety.
Whoa.
It's kind of mind-blowing, right? How can a system benefit from making people miserable?
Well, think about it, a population that's content and secure and, mentally well. They're less likely to accept exploitation or inequality.
Yeah, they'd probably demand better conditions.
Exactly. They'd question authority. They'd push for change.
So it's like keep them stressed, keep them distracted, and they won't rock the boat.
Right. And one way capitalism does this is by suppressing any alternative ways of thinking.
Like anything that challenges the status quo.
Exactly. Ideas like socialism or anti-capitalism, they often get shut down or ridiculed before they can even gain any traction.
Like the Overton window, right?
Yeah, there's this invisible fence around what we're allowed to even think about.
And when people do start to feel the strain, the answer is always individual.
Therapy, medication, self-care.
Important things, but
they don't address the root causes of suffering.
it's like we're told to fix ourselves instead of questioning the system that's making us sick in the first place.
Right. And then, on top of that, you have the destruction of collective spaces.
Unions, community centers, affordable housing.
All those places where people might come together, build solidarity, and imagine something different.
They're disappearing.
Yeah, it's like isolation by design, keep people atomized, keep them competing with each other, and they're less likely to pose a threat to the status quo.
And Hoerricks sees this really clearly in the attacks on trans existence.
Yeah, they see it as a stark example of alienation enforced by law.
The state is actively trying to erase trans people from public life.
It's beyond just marginalization. It's about denying people the right to exist as their authentic selves.
To access healthcare, to live with dignity and safety.
And it's important to connect this to the broader targeting of marginalized groups, people of color, immigrants, the working class, anyone who threatens the power dynamics of the system.
It's divide and conquer, right? Pit people against each other while the real culprits, the systems of exploitation and oppression, remain unchallenged.
And in this climate of fear and precarity, the pressure to pass becomes even more intense.
It's not about authenticity anymore, it's about survival.
But as Hoerricks points out, passing has always been a capitalist mechanism, a way of making oneself palatable to a system that doesn't actually want you to exist.
It's a demand without end.
And it's exhausting. It's why Hoerricks celebrates joy, unapologetic, defiant joy as an act of resistance.
I love that refusing to conform, embracing your true self, and finding moments of happiness even in the face of oppressor.
Yeah, it's like a big middle finger to the system.
So if capitalism is this relentless machine of alienation, how do we even begin to fight back?
Hoerricks says it starts with recognizing that our individual struggles are connected to these larger forces. We have to move beyond self-help and recognize that true healing requires collective action and systemic change.
So instead of just trying to fix ourselves, we need to fix the system.
You got it. Hoerricks talks about the importance of building alternative spaces where capitalist logic doesn't dominate.
Okay, I'm really curious about this. What do those spaces look like in real life?
Think mutual aid networks where people directly support each other, sharing resources and skills outside of the traditional market economy. Or worker cooperatives where employees have ownership and control over their labor.
So they have more of a stake in what they're doing.
Yeah, it fosters a sense of purpose and collective responsibility.
That sounds amazing, but is it really possible to create these kinds of spaces within a system that's so focused on individualism and competition?
It's definitely an uphill battle, but it's happening all over the world. People are creating community gardens, setting up free stores, organizing skill shares. There's so much creativity and resilience out there.
So it's about taking back our power.
Individually and collectively.
Right, and advocating for policies that prioritize human needs over corporate profits.
Affordable housing, universal healthcare, living wages. These are all mental health issues.
Wow, I never thought about it that way.
When people's basic needs are met, they're more likely to thrive, both individually and as a community.
Earlier you mentioned something called radical mental health collectives. What exactly are those?
There are groups that are challenging the traditional medical model of mental health, the one that focuses on individual diagnoses and treatments.
Okay.
They recognize that social injustice plays a huge role in mental well-being, and they work to create more holistic and community-based approaches to healing.
So it's about moving beyond the therapist's office and creating spaces where people can support each other, share their experiences, and advocate for systemic change.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our struggles are interconnected and that our liberation is bound up with each other's.
This all ties back to the idea of radical hope and joy as acts of defiance.
Absolutely. Even in the face of immense challenges, choosing to believe in the possibility of a better world, finding moments of beauty and connection, those are acts of resistance in themselves.
It's about refusing to let the system crush our spirits, choosing to find joy and meaning even in the midst of struggle.
And it's about remembering that we're not alone in this fight. There are countless people working to create a more just and compassionate world, often in quiet and unassuming ways.
It's inspiring to think about all the different ways people are resisting alienation and building a world that prioritizes well-being.
And that's ultimately what Hoerricks leaves us with: a sense of possibility, a call to action, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can still find ways to resist, to connect, and to create something beautiful.
Okay, so let's get back to those tools for resisting alienation. It feels like we've been uncovering all this heavy stuff, but what can we actually do about it?
Well, it's not about finding that one magic solution. It's more about shifting our whole approach to well-being. Hoerricks is really clear that individual resilience just isn't enough.
Right.
We need to fight for social and economic justice if we really want to tackle this problem.
So it's not just about meditating or going to therapy. We have to actually change the systems that are causing all this harm.
Exactly. Remember Fana's work on colonial oppression? He said true healing can't happen within the same structures that created the harm.
Oh, wow.
We need to build something totally different.
It's like trying to grow a garden in toxic soil. You can tend to those plants as much as you want, but they'll never truly thrive
Right.
unless you change the soil itself.
That's a great analogy. And that's where Hoerricks' call for collective action comes in. They talk about building alternative spaces where capitalist logic just doesn't rule.
Okay, so what do those spaces look like in real life?
Think mutual aid networks where people are directly supporting each other, sharing resources and skills, outside of that traditional market economy. Or worker cooperatives where employees actually have ownership and control over their labor.
They've got skin in the game.
Yeah, exactly. It creates this sense of purpose and responsibility.
That sounds amazing, but is it really possible to create these kinds of spaces when everything around us is so focused on me, me, me?
It's tough for sure, but it is happening. People are creating community gardens, setting up free stores, organizing skill shares. There's so much creativity out there.
People are finding a way.
Absolutely. It's about taking back our power.
Individually and as a group.
Yeah, and it's about pushing for policies that actually help people: affordable housing, universal health care, living wages.
Those sound like pretty basic things.
They are, and they're all mental health issues too.
That's a really good point.
When our basic needs are met, we're more likely to thrive
Makes sense.
as individuals and as a community.
You mentioned radical mental health collectives before. What are those all about?
Well, there are groups that are really challenging that traditional medical model of mental health, the one that focuses on individual diagnoses and treatments.
Yeah.
They understand that social injustice has a huge impact on our mental well-being.
It's not all in our heads.
Exactly, and they're working to create these more holistic and community-based approaches to healing.
So it's about moving beyond just the therapist's office.
Right, creating spaces where people can support each other, share their experiences, and really advocate for change.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah, our struggles are interconnected, and we can't find true liberation on our own.
This all ties back to that idea of radical hope and joy as acts of defiance.
Absolutely. Even when things feel really tough, choosing to believe in something better, finding moments of beauty and connection, those are powerful acts of resistance.
It's about not letting the system win, choosing joy even in the midst of struggle.
Exactly, and remembering that we're not alone in this. There's so many people out there working to create a better world, often in really quiet ways.
That's actually really inspiring.
It is. Hoerricks leaves us with this sense of possibility, a call to action, and a reminder that even when things are dark, the human spirit can still find a way to resist, to connect, and to create something beautiful.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? We've explored how capitalism creates this sense of alienation, but we've also seen that resistance is possible. So the question is, what will you do with this knowledge?
Will you keep accepting those dominant narratives around mental health, or will you start to see things differently?
Will you stay isolated, or will you seek out communities of care and solidarity?
Will you give in to despair, or will you choose to believe in a different future?
That's it for our deep dive on alienation. Thanks for joining us.
We hope you found it thought-provoking.
Definitely empowering.
If you want to learn more, be sure to check out Hoerricks' work.
And remember, the fight against alienation, it's a collective one.
Every act of resistance, no matter how small, it all adds up.
So keep questioning, keep connecting, and keep resisting.
We'll see you next time.